So hello, everyone. We are Three Dead Oysters, and this is Overcast. So really quick about the team. We have myself, Nuha, as the creative lead, Destiny as backends and systems programmer, Kryn as our level designer, Sean as our VFX artist, and Will as our UI designer. A couple of us fill out some other roles as well. Overcast is a 3D adventure game about a sand shifter, protecting her home from futuristic oppressive forces. The game focuses on dynamic traversal and exploration. By controlling sand and using the land to your advantage, traverse a wide range of desert locations and destroy the technological artifacts polluting the land. So our game has an overarching theme about oppression. And this is kind of shown through our protagonists and our antagonistic forces. Our sand shifter is someone who is the idea of the land come alive. They're able to shapeshift their body, which is molecularly sand, and bend the sand around them to traverse the land. Our technological artifacts are placed around the world by our unnamed oppressors. In the example in this image here, that would be this orb. A lot of this theme is a lot more simple and subtle in our game, and that's because we don't have time in the semester to flesh out all of that narrative and do it justice. So a lot of it will be more simple. Our game is broken down into 3 parts. We have aesthetics, world exploration, and dynamic traversal. And our goal for the end of the semester is to have a really nice technical slice that feels good to play and makes the player intrigued into what the rest of the game would feel like. And along with that goal, we want it to seem like the game is really technically impressive with its aesthetics and how good it looks. We're aiming for a semi-realistic art style. We're developing the game in Unreal Engine 4. For the color palette, we're thinking pink, whites, and oranges for anything that's natural, black, red, and gray for those technological artifacts that are placed around the land. For textures, it's going to be grainy for anything natural and metallic for anything futuristic, and landscapes, curves versus smooth, rounded edges. So why is our player exploring the world? We're planning on having 2 to 3 polished points of interest. That would be like that orb, for example. And all of this would be on a really massive scale. We plan on using Unreal Engine's world composition support to build out the world and use these points of interest as incentive for the player to go around the world and find out what's there. For our target audience, we're aiming for players who are fans of exploration games. Games like Journey, Breath of the Wild, where there isn't really a clear objective, but everything is a lot more subtly directing the player. We're also aiming to have 2 to 3 possible technological artifacts around the world, but we do want to build out one really well before moving on to the next. As the players go to these technological artifacts and destroy them, the player is able to unlock traversal abilities that would help them get to the next one. And for the game, we'll be using a lot of free assets because we don't have a 3D modeler on our team. So our first design meeting was talking about movement that we liked in other games. And a lot of our big comparisons were Solar Ash, where we liked how flowy the movement felt, where the player can kind of get lost in movement. We liked how you could be able to sprint while also having really slow basic movement to do precise movements. For the pathless, we liked how it had a sprint gauge at the bottom, where the player had to keep track of something, but not be entirely focused on it. We also like that you can leap across the environment with great distances. And the last reference is Journey. We really liked how you could speed up on a decline, and that's something that we plan to implement. So overall, we have sprinting, crouch vaulting, and sliding for our movement, and these will be our main mechanics in our state machine. It's not overly complex because we want the game to feel like something that the player can pick up and put down at any time. Again, our semester goals is just to focus on polish, having minimalistic UI, building out this VFX. We want the world to feel like it's massive, while also kind of having that subliminal, surrealistic narrative to it. And finally, our dynamic traversal. We want to focus on iterating this over the course of the semester with a lot of playtests so that it also feels good to play while also looks good to play. And yeah, that's Overcast. Do we have any questions? gonna go ahead and stop sharing.
How are you guys, I guess, what Unreal tools are you considering to use for the visuals? Because it sounds like you had a lot of particles in there.
Yeah, I
go ahead, Sean.
So currently I'm trying to make a sandstorm effect using materials as well as the particle systems to build on top of each other and create more layered effects. Besides that, I think just getting some free assets would be useful that sort of fit our style and fit that what we're trying to go for. Besides that, I think that's really all that I was thinking of.
What about any terrain deformation?
For the terrain, we're using a landscape plugin currently for procedurally like generating the plane and using height maps that we can find on various free websites and kind of forming the terrain out that way when we need it. And that also has like abilities to like sculpt the terrain to any specifics that we want.
Cool. Yeah. As long as you can, if you can get the effects and the terrain deformation to kind of look cohesive, it'll look really good. So just my thoughts.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments?
I was wondering about your main character. You said that you currently don't have a 3D modeler, and I see that your game revolves around a lot of movement and animation. What is your plan for the main character?
So currently our plan is to use websites like Mixamo to kind of get those animations in. Unreal does have the ability to adjust 3D animations to how we need it. So we're trying to make those minute adjustments because we don't have a 3D animator. And that's going to be how we're going to compensate for the animation size. For the modeling side, we're trying to find probably a free assets for now until we can find a 3D modeler who would be willing to come onto the team as an external artist.
Okay, great. Yeah, just wondering if you had, like a plan with Mixamo and stuff like that. So thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question. What would the progression be as the game continues? As far as is there any progression in the traversal or in the complexity of the areas that you would explore?
Yeah, if I could open up the screenshot again, because I think it's great to have the map for this question. For one of the, so for our map, we were already thinking about how to advance the player's ability. We have a first area on the top left, which will be a wall surrounding the player. By destroying the artifact, they are able to get something that would allow them to scale walls and traverse that way. The orb is an example of something that is oppressive in how it's siphoning water out of the nearby civilization. That would help or give the player some ability to traverse areas of water, water being the naturalistic antagonistic force to the player who is sand. And our last idea, we thought of something that would be cool, like a reverberating sound wave that is keeping the player away from like a culturally significant site, and having the player be able to gain something that would help them move past that at really fast rates. Again, that is a very stretched goal for the semester, but we did start to think about that in our narrative.
All right, cool. Thank you.
No problem. Oh, I think we have a question from Vivian in chat. You folks mentioned about the 3 main artifacts, but focused to build the first one really well. What is the backup plan if it does not work as desired? That's a great question. I think our plan then would be to look at playtest and get some feedback onto why that is not what was desired, and think about pivoting it based on that feedback. We could also try moving to a different artifact and seeing if that one works well. For example, the first artifact of a wall just like wasn't interesting to the player, then we would pivot to another artifact and see if we need to scratch this one altogether. Hope that answers your question.
I have another question. So you mentioned kind of a lot of different Unreal tools that you're planning on using for different features in the game. How have you done any prototyping of the specific features yet? Because you mentioned using Unreal to modify animations, Unreal Terrain, and I'm just curious if you've experimented at all to see if how far you can get with just the basic out of the box tool, right?
So it's funny because I think it was just yesterday that we built out like a lot of the map and kind of needed to answer the question of how big can we make the world? And the answer is it's kind of unreal. You can build it really big. We already have our current landscape being modeled out with that procedural plugin that I talked about before. So that has been experimented. For animations, we currently are using free animations. That's currently being worked in. We have basic crouching and like sprinting almost implemented. So we are trying to get these basic movements out as quick as possible so that we can figure it out and pivot to a different thing if we need to, or find a solution to it as quick as possible before it gets way late into the semester. I think the animation is probably the only thing we haven't touched on yet, just because we want to get those movements figured out.
Yeah, I would just keep in mind that you don't have to fully integrate something into the game to find out if it works, right? Sometimes it's really helpful to just put together a quick little side project to see whether can we use this or not, and then decide whether you want to invest the time to integrate the feature into the game the whole way.
That's definitely great advice, and we'll get on that soon.
Yeah, I was going to jump on that actually, because instead of having a main character, because of the things you guys sounds like what you want to do, one thing you could also look into is just using the particle effects to make the character, since you want to do stuff with sand and make it kind of morph around. Instead of making character and modeling, just use the particle effects, so that way you can use a system and kind of just plug it in, because like the art is going to be the toughest thing for you guys, as well as making sure that everything is cohesive and everything's colored properly and everything. So it's try to use what's there, and then like you said, just prototype as much as possible. I think you guys do fine.
Great, thank you. We have a follow-up question from Vivian. What is the time frame to correct the course? So I believe our first play test would be week 6. I don't know, Erica, you might. It's about.
I don't have the schedule in front of me, but that sounds about right.
That sounds about right. So we have about 6 weeks to correct the course, and ideally we would get playtest out as soon as possible to find an alternative. We have a couple of in-class playtests. I think we have 2 or possibly 3, but
we can add as many as we need.
We as a team, we do have a Discord server set up where we would be taking in playtesters to get a lot more feedback outside of what's just given to us in class time. Awesome, thanks.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to Renegades.